evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Edward R. Harlan, bringing you the Harlan Evening Report, straight from the heart of America on this crisp January evening in 1961. My friends, today, January 20, 1961, will be etched in the annals of our history as the day a new torch was passed to a new generation of Americans. In a ceremony rich with tradition and heavy with the weight of the world, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was sworn in as the 35th President of the United States. Before a vast crowd bundled against the biting cold on the east portico of the Capitol, Chief Justice Earl Warren administered the oath of office at precisely noon. The youngest man ever elected to the presidency, 43 years young, stood hatless in the winter chill, his breath visible as he placed his hand on the same family Bible used by Abraham Lincoln a century ago. Beside him stood his gracious wife, Jacqueline, radiant in her beige coat and pillbox hat, while former presidents Eisenhower and Truman, Vice President Nixon, and a host of dignitaries looked on. Then came the address, a brief but stirring inaugural speech that rang out across the snow-dusted grounds and into millions of American homes via radio and television. President Kennedy spoke not of partisan victory, but of shared purpose in a dangerous hour. He began by acknowledging the peaceful transfer of power, a triumph of our revolutionary beliefs renewed. "The world is very different now," he said, "for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." Yet, he declared, the same beliefs for which our forebears fought remain at issue around the globe, that rights come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. To the nations of the world he pledged unwavering commitment. "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty." He called for a global alliance against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. To those new states emerging from colonial rule, he offered not exploitation, but help in casting off the chains of poverty. To our sister republics south of the border, a new alliance for progress. To the United Nations, renewed support. And in a direct message to the Soviet Union, he extended an olive branch amid the firm resolve: "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." He urged both sides to explore the wonders of science instead of its terrors, to begin anew the quest for peace before the dark powers of destruction unleashed by science engulf all humanity. Perhaps most memorably, President Kennedy turned to his fellow Americans with a challenge that will echo for generations. "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." He closed with an appeal to the world's citizens. "My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man." The crowd erupted in sustained applause, and even hardened Washington observers noted the electric atmosphere, a sense of vigor, of youth, of a new frontier opening before us. Despite 8 inches of snow that blanketed the Capitol overnight, causing chaos with abandoned cars and delayed arrivals, the ceremonies proceeded with only minor hitches. The parade down Pennsylvania Avenue went on, with floats and marching bands braving the cold, and tonight the new President and First Lady will attend a series of gala inaugural balls. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a moment of renewal. At 43, John F. Kennedy becomes not only the youngest elected president, but the first Roman Catholic to hold the office, a milestone for our diverse nation. He succeeds General Eisenhower, the oldest man to have served in the role, symbolizing a vivid passing of the guard from the heroes of World War II to those tempered by its aftermath. The challenges ahead are formidable. a tense Cold War, unrest in the Congo, stirrings in Laos, and here at home, the continuing struggle for civil rights and economic vitality. But tonight, the words of our new leader ring with hope and resolve. We'll have more coverage of the inauguration, reactions from around the nation and the world, and other news of the day as this broadcast continues. Stay with us. This is Edward R. Harlan on the Harlan Evening Report. As the nation turns its gaze to the vigorous new administration of President Kennedy, we pause to reflect on the parting words of his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, delivered just 3 nights ago in a televised farewell address from the Oval Office. On Tuesday evening, January 17, 1961, the retiring president, General Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II and leader of our country through 8 momentous years, spoke directly to the American people with a message of leave-taking and sober counsel. In a calm, measured tone that carried the weight of his long service, Mr. Eisenhower warned of dangers lurking in our very progress. He highlighted what he called the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry, something new in the American experience. This conjunction, he said, brings influence that is economic, political, even spiritual, and is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. Then came the phrase that has already sparked widespread discussion across the land. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. He went on to stress that only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can ensure that security and liberty prosper together, compelling the proper meshing of our huge defense machinery with our peaceful goals. Mr. Eisenhower, himself a 5-star general who knew the costs of war firsthand, did not decry the need for strong defenses in this perilous Cold War era. He acknowledged that we have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions, adding 3.5 million men and women to our armed forces since he took office. But he cautioned against letting this necessary strength become a dominating force. He also spoke of another threat, the risk that public policy could become captive to a scientific technological elite, as federal dollars increasingly dominate research, much of it tied to military needs. The president urged balance, disarmament talks with adversaries, aid to the underdeveloped world, and wise stewardship of our resources to avoid plundering tomorrow for today's ease. He closed on a note of faith in America's enduring values. We pray that peoples of all faiths, all races, all stations will together build a better world. Reactions poured in swiftly. Many in Congress and the press hailed the address as statesmanlike and prophetic, coming from a man who had presided over prosperity and relative peace. Some noted the irony, a career soldier sounding the alarm on military influence, but most saw it as the mature wisdom of experience. Others wondered if the warning came too late after years of expanding defense budgets. Yet there is no denying its impact. In editorial pages from coast to coast, Americans are debating what this military-industrial complex truly means for our democracy. As Mr. Eisenhower returns to his farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, leaving behind the burdens of the highest office, His final words stand as a challenge to us all, leaders and citizens alike, to remain vigilant guardians of our freedoms. We'll continue monitoring responses to the farewell address and how the new Kennedy team addresses these concerns in the days ahead. That's the latest from Washington. More news from home and abroad coming up shortly. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. Good evening once again. This is Edward R. Harlan with the Harlan Evening Report. While the inaugural festivities continued into the evening hours here in Washington, one of the more colorful chapters of the day unfolded along Pennsylvania Avenue, where thousands of paraders braved biting cold and gusty winds to march past the new president and his guests in the reviewing stand outside the White House. The headline in tomorrow morning's New York Times captures it perfectly. Capitol paraders don overcoats to pass in White House review. Yes, folks, those smartly uniformed bandsmen, the precision drill teams, the floats from every state, and the marching units from the armed services, all of them bundled up in heavy overcoats, scarves, and earmuffs as temperatures hovered in the low 20s and a sharp wind whipped down the avenue. What was meant to be a glittering display of pageantry turned into a hearty demonstration of American endurance. The parade, which began shortly after 2:30 in the afternoon, following the swearing-in ceremonies at the Capitol, stretched on for nearly 4 hours. President Kennedy, hatless as he had been during the oath-taking, stood throughout much of it, applauding enthusiastically as the columns passed. Beside him, Mrs. Kennedy, elegant in a sable-trimmed coat, and former President Eisenhower, Vice President Johnson, and a host of dignitaries watched from the glass-enclosed stand. Highlights included the magnificent floats representing the 50 states, though some arrived late due to the massive snow cleanup from yesterday's blizzard, the crack Army and Marine units, the jaunty West Point cadets, and the stirring massed bands playing everything from Hail to the Chief to Yankee Doodle. A touch of glamour came from Hollywood, with stars like Cary Grant and others riding in open cars. But the cold took its toll. Many marchers who had planned lighter uniforms wisely donned their overcoats at the last minute. Spectators along the route, hundreds of thousands strong despite the chill, cheered warmly, waving flags and snapping photographs. Bonfires were lit in some sections to warm frozen hands and feet. By the time the final units passed just before dusk, the parade had lived up to its promise as a grand spectacle, even if Mother Nature forced a few practical adjustments. The President and First Lady then departed for a whirlwind evening, attending 5 inaugural balls across the city, where dancing and celebration continued into the early morning hours. It's moments like these, Americans turning out in force, smiling through the cold, that remind us of the spirit President Kennedy invoked today in his address. The pageantry may have been bundled against the weather, but the enthusiasm was red hot. We'll have more on the day's events, including international reactions to the new president's words as our broadcast continues. The Capitol's whirlwind of celebration came to a glittering close in the early hours this morning with 5 grand inaugural balls, where, despite the lingering chill from Friday's snow and cold, the city truly had a ball. The headline in many papers today says it best: Capitol shivers, but it has a ball. President and Mrs. Kennedy, radiating youth and vitality, made the rounds of all 5 gala events, dancing and greeting thousands of well-wishers until nearly dawn. The festivities began at the D.C. Armory, moved to the Mayflower Hotel, then the Statler Hilton, the Sheraton Park,
and finally the National Guard Armory, each venue packed with dignitaries, diplomats, celebrities, and everyday Americans who had journeyed to witness history. Mrs. Kennedy, elegant in a white silk gown designed by Oleg Cassini with a matching cape, drew gasps of admiration wherever she appeared. The President, ever the gracious host, danced with his wife, with Vice President Johnson's Ladybird, and with dozens of others, all while flashes from photographers' bulbs lit up the ballrooms like summer lightning. Music filled the night, big bands playing everything from waltzes to the twist, with stars like Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and Harry Belafonte lending their talents to the entertainment. One highlight, the President and First Lady leading a conga line that snaked through the crowds, bringing laughter and cheers. But oh, the weather! Temperatures dipped into the teens overnight, and many guests arrived bundled in furs and overcoats, only to check them at the door for the warmth inside. Taxis were scarce, streets still slick from the record snowfall, yet the spirit was undampened. One society matron was overheard saying, "We've shivered all day, now we're ready to swing." By the time the last notes faded around 4 a.m., the Kennedys had capped a day of solemn oath-taking and stirring words with a night of pure American revelry. It was a fitting end to the formal transition, a blend of duty and delight, of resolve and romance. Washington wakes today a bit weary, perhaps, but buoyed by the sense that a new chapter has begun, with style and energy. We'll have reactions from abroad to President Kennedy's address, and more domestic news as our broadcast continues.
Good evening once again. This is Edward R. Harlan with the Harlan Evening Report. While the nation's capital and much of the country basks in the afterglow of a historic inauguration, a fierce winter storm that blanketed Washington in snow has lingered, crippling the Northeast with heavy drifts and bitter cold that show no signs of relenting soon. The death toll from the severe weather across the East has now climbed to 47, with accidents on icy roads, heart attacks from shoveling heavy snow, and exposure claiming lives from New England to the mid-Atlantic. Here in the New York metropolitan area, a 24-hour snowstorm tied up traffic and daily life, dumping heavy accumulations that brought the city and suburbs to a near standstill. Public schools and Catholic schools across the city were closed today, giving youngsters an unexpected holiday, though many spent it helping dig out driveways and sidewalks. Travel remains severely hampered, highways clogged with drifts, airports delayed or shuttered, trains running late, and many factories and businesses forced to shut down or operate with skeleton crews. Light winds offered little relief, allowing the snow to pile high in places, with some rural areas reporting drifts up to rooftop level. Forecasters say the cold will continue through the weekend, with temperatures struggling to rise above freezing and more flurries possible. Authorities are urging motorists to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary, and warning of the dangers of overexertion in the heavy, wet snow. This storm, one of the worst in recent years, served as an uninvited guest at President Kennedy's inauguration, turning the Capitol white overnight and forcing parade participants to bundle up. But, as we've seen, it couldn't dampen the spirit of the day. Relief efforts are underway, with plows and salt trucks working around the clock, and communities pulling together, as Americans always do in times of hardship. We'll keep you updated on the weather outlook and any further impacts as conditions evolve. That's the latest from the wintry Northeast. More news from Washington and around the world coming up shortly. Stay warm and stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. As the severe winter weather continues to grip much of the eastern United States, the great snowstorm that turned President Kennedy's Inauguration Day into a sparkling white spectacle has exacted a heavier toll today, keeping thousands from their jobs and snarling travel across the region. Here in New York City and the surrounding areas, heavy drifts at airports have grounded airliners and halted flights, while highways and throughways see only light traffic, with some roads completely blocked by snow and stranded vehicles. Ships in the harbor are slowed, and many commuters simply couldn't make it to work, leading to curtailed operations at factories, offices, and stores. Attendance was thin in many places, as workers battled the aftermath of the storm that dumped heavy accumulations overnight Thursday into Friday. Some roads remain impassable, and authorities are advising against unnecessary travel as cleanup crews work around the clock with plows and salt spreaders. The storm's effects are felt far beyond the city. Reports from upstate and New England speak of similar disruptions, with schools closed, businesses short-staffed, and rural areas isolated by drifts. This same blizzard, of course, provided the dramatic backdrop for yesterday's historic events in Washington, blanketing the Capitol in 8 inches of snow and forcing paraders to don overcoats for the review. But while it added a picturesque touch to the pageantry, it's now a formidable obstacle for everyday Americans trying to get back to normal life. Forecasters offer little immediate relief, predicting continued cold with possible additional flurries. Stay safe out there, folks. Clear those sidewalks carefully and give yourself extra time if you must venture out. We'll keep you posted on any improvements in travel conditions or further weather developments. Turning now to a tragic aviation mystery here in the New York area. Investigators remain baffled tonight by the cause of a jet airliner crash that claimed 4 lives during takeoff yesterday from Idlewild Airport. An American Airlines Boeing 707, bound for Los Angeles with 92 passengers and crew aboard, had just lifted off the runway when it suddenly veered sharply, struck a runway light, and plunged into the shallow waters of Jamaica Bay. Miraculously, 88 persons survived, many escaping through emergency exits into the freezing water, where rescuers in boats pulled them to safety amid flames and debris. But 4 passengers perished in the accident, and authorities are scratching their heads over what went wrong. Preliminary reports indicate no obvious mechanical failure. The weather was clear, the runway dry. Pilots and experts are puzzled. Why did this powerful jet, one of the most advanced in the skies, suddenly lose control moments after becoming airborne? The Civil Aeronautics Board has launched a full inquiry, with teams combing the wreckage recovered from the bay. American Airlines officials expressed deep regret and pledged full cooperation. Survivors, many treated for shock and minor injuries at local hospitals, spoke of a normal takeoff until the sudden lurch. This incident comes at a time when jet travel is booming, promising speed and comfort to a new generation of flyers. Yet it serves as a sobering reminder that even the most modern aircraft demand constant vigilance. We'll bring you updates as investigators piece together the puzzle of this still unexplained wreck. That's the latest on this local tragedy. More news from the new Kennedy administration and points beyond coming up shortly. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. Shifting now to a brewing labor dispute on the nation's railroads. 5 powerful union organizations have firmly rejected a plea from carriers to suspend picketing for 10 days,
keeping the threat of a nationwide rail strike very much alive. The unions representing non-operating employees turned down the request in a terse statement today, insisting that any cooling-off period must include progress towards settling long-standing work rules disputes. Picketing has already begun at some terminals, and a full walkout could paralyze freight and passenger service across the country if no agreement is reached soon. Management had sought the brief halt in informational picketing to allow more time for negotiations under the Railway Labor Act, but union leaders countered that they've waited long enough for meaningful concessions on featherbedding and job protection issues that have deadlocked talks for months. Government mediators are continuing efforts to avert a shutdown, with both sides scheduled for further sessions in Washington. President Kennedy's new Labor Secretary, Arthur Goldberg, is monitoring the situation closely, though no direct White House intervention has been announced yet. A strike would hit hard at this time of year, disrupting coal shipments for heating, mail delivery, and the movement of goods vital to the economy still recovering from last year's recession. Commuter lines in major cities like New York and Chicago could also feel the pinch. We'll keep a close eye on this one, folks. The rails are the backbone of American transport, and no one wants to see them grind to a halt. That's the latest on the labor front. More news from home and abroad as our broadcast continues. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. From Moscow comes a significant message timed to coincide with the change of leadership here in Washington. Soviet Premier Nikita S. Khrushchev has expressed hope for improved relations with the United States, sending a direct communication to the new President Kennedy urging a joint drive to ease world tensions. In a formal message released today, January 21, 1961, Mr. Khrushchev congratulated President Kennedy on his inauguration and voiced optimism that the two superpowers can find common ground to reduce the dangers threatening global peace. The Soviet leader proposed that both sides undertake serious efforts to resolve outstanding issues through negotiation, specifically calling for progress on disarmament, a ban on nuclear testing, and the settlement of disputes like the situation in Germany and Berlin. He warned against the forces of aggression and reaction, but emphasized that the USSR seeks peaceful coexistence and competition rather than confrontation. This overture comes at a delicate moment in the Cold War, with flashpoints in Laos, the Congo, and Cuba testing the resolve of both East and West. President Kennedy, in his inaugural address yesterday, had extended his own hand, saying, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." White House sources indicate the message was received warmly, though no immediate response has been announced. Diplomats in Washington and abroad are interpreting it as a positive signal, a possible opening for summit talks or renewed arms control discussions in the months ahead. Of course, words must be matched by deeds, and many here recall Mr. Khrushchev's fiery rhetoric in the past. Yet this gesture, delivered on the very day a vigorous young president takes office, offers a glimmer of hope that the chill of the Cold War might begin to thaw. We'll be watching closely for the administration's reply and any signs of reciprocal steps from the Kremlin. That's the latest from the International Desk, a message of cautious optimism across the Iron Curtain. From Moscow tonight comes word of a major reorganization in the Soviet Union's agricultural machinery and food distribution systems, as Premier Nikita S. Khrushchev pushes aggressively to boost the nation's lagging food production.
In a sweeping shakeup announced today, Mr. Khrushchev has ordered significant changes in the supply and distribution networks aimed squarely at increasing output of grain, meat, milk, and other essentials that have fallen short of promises in recent years. The Soviet leader, speaking to a gathering of farm officials, criticized past inefficiencies and called for tighter central control over machinery allocation while decentralizing some day-to-day operations to regional committees. New procurement agencies are being established to streamline the flow of food from collective farms to consumers, with incentives for higher yields and penalties for shortfalls. This move reflects the ongoing struggle within the Soviet economy to feed its growing population amid persistent agricultural troubles, weather woes, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and the lingering effects of earlier collectivization policies. Mr. Khrushchev, who has staked much of his leadership on surpassing Western living standards, has made food abundance a top priority, even importing grain in recent months to fill gaps. Observers here see this as more than administrative tinkering. It's a direct acknowledgement that the Virgin Lands campaign and other bold initiatives of the past decade haven't delivered the promised bounty. The changes could affect millions of farmers and consumers across the vast Soviet expanse. Of course, this comes just as our new President Kennedy receives Mr. Khrushchev's message of hoped-for better relations. Whether agricultural reforms at home will temper or intensify the Soviet posture abroad remains to be seen. We'll continue to follow developments from the Kremlin as this food drive unfolds. That's the latest from the Soviet Union. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. From Havana tonight comes a noteworthy response to President Kennedy's inaugural address. Cuban Premier Fidel Castro has expressed readiness for a fresh start in relations with the United States, suggesting the possibility of renewed amity between our two nations. In a speech today, January 21, 1961, Dr. Castro directly referenced the new president's words from yesterday, particularly the call to begin anew in the quest for peace. The Cuban leader indicated that his revolutionary government is prepared to turn a new page, provided there is mutual respect and no interference in Cuba's internal affairs. This overture arrives amid strained ties that have worsened steadily over the past year, marked by the expropriation of American properties, the break in diplomatic relations earlier this month, and growing accusations from Washington of communist influence in the Castro regime. Dr. Castro framed his remarks as a positive reaction to Mr. Kennedy's emphasis on negotiation over fear, and to the themes of liberty and anti-tyranny in the inaugural speech. He stressed Cuba's desire for peaceful coexistence in the hemisphere, while defending the revolution's achievements in land reform, education, and social justice. Observers here are cautious in their assessment. While the statement offers a glimmer of hope for de-escalation in the Caribbean, many point to the deep ideological divide and the ongoing exodus of refugees fleeing the island. The Eisenhower administration had taken strong measures against Havana, and it remains to be seen how the young Kennedy team will respond, whether with dialogue or continued firmness. No official comment has come from the State Department yet, but diplomats are surely taking note of this timely gesture from the bearded premier, delivered just as a new voice of vigor echoes from the White House. We'll be following any further exchanges or clarifications from either capital closely. That's the latest from Cuba, a suggestion of amity that could signal a turning point, or perhaps just another chapter in the complex dance between Washington and Havana. More news from around the world and here at home as our broadcast continues. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. Good evening once again. This is Edward R. Harlan with the Harlan Evening Report. And now let's turn to the brighter lights of culture and entertainment, a welcome respite on this wintry Saturday as the arts continue to flourish in our great city. Last evening at Carnegie Hall, the distinguished violinist Ruggiero Ricci presented a program of truly ambitious scope that tested both his formidable technique and the endurance of his audience. Mr. Ricci, long admired for his virtuosity, offered a recital that included the complete 6 solo sonatas and partitas by Johann Sebastian Bach, a monumental cycle rarely performed in its entirety in a single evening. The program also featured Paganini's demanding Caprice No. 24 in A minor, with its famous variations, along with works by Tartini, Vivaldi, and Ernst. Critics note that while Mr. Ricci's tone remains pure and his intonation remarkably secure, some passages in the Bach felt a touch hurried, sacrificing depth for brilliance. Yet there was no denying the thunderous applause for this marathon display of violin mastery, a program that few artists would dare attempt. In another debut worth noting, oboist John Caldwell of the Philadelphia Orchestra made an impressive first appearance as a soloist in New York, performing at Town Hall. Mr. Caldwell, principal oboe with one of America's finest ensembles under Eugene Ormandy, brought a warm singing tone and confident phrasing to a program of Baroque and modern works, including pieces by Handel, Telemann, and contemporary composers. His control of the instrument's tricky upper register drew particular praise, marking him as a rising chamber artist to watch. Over on the silver screen, filmgoers have a new Russian import to enjoy, a lavish adaptation of Don Quixote, Cervantes' timeless tale of the dreamy knight-errant and his faithful squire Sancho Panza. This Soviet production, directed with sweeping visual flair, opened yesterday at 2 Manhattan theaters, the Embassy and the Guild. Starring Nikolai Cherkasov, the memorable actor from Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible, as the idealistic Don, the film brings the Spanish classic to life with colorful pageantry, windmills tilting in the Spanish sun, and a touch of gentle humor. While some may find the pacing deliberate by Hollywood standards, the cinematography and Cherkasov's heartfelt performance capture the spirit of chivalry and illusion that has enchanted readers for centuries. If you're seeking an evening of literary grandeur on screen, this Quixote is well worth the quest. And finally, for those drawn to the exotic, dancer and choreographer Sophia Delza presented a fascinating program titled Dances of the Chinese Theater at the Kaufman Auditorium last night. Miss Delza, one of the few Western artists deeply trained in classical Chinese forms, offered a series of solo and group pieces drawn from the rich tradition of Beijing opera and other theatrical styles. Her movements, precise, flowing, and laden with symbolic gesture, brought to life characters from ancient tales, accompanied by traditional percussion and string instruments. The audience was treated to demonstrations of the stylized combat dances, sleeve movements, and fan techniques that define this art form. Miss Delza's performance serves as both entertainment and education, bridging East and West in a graceful display that reminds us of the universality of dance. There you have it, folks. A violin marathon at Carnegie, a promising oboe debut, a nightly adventure from Russia on film, and the elegance of Chinese theatrical dance. The cultural life of New York marches on, offering beauty and inspiration even as winter holds us in its grip. We'll have sports and lighter notes coming up shortly. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. Time now for your Saturday's sports roundup. And while the winter weather has kept many outdoors at bay, the indoor track season is heating up with some exciting action on the boards. Today marks the 12th annual Cardinal Hayes Games at the 102nd Engineers Armory here in New York, where records in the 600-yard and 1,000-yard events are very much in jeopardy. This meet, one of the highlights for high school athletes in the metropolitan area, draws top schoolboy talent, and the fields are loaded with promise. In the 600 yards, keep an eye on John Sassport of Mount St. Michael, a relay runner stepping into the spotlight, who clocked a swift 1:14.1 just last Saturday in his very first individual race of that distance, winning easily with little competition pushing him. He'll face stiff challenges from Jim Warren of Zavarian, who posted 1:15.1 in the recent Laughlin Games and holds the meet record of 1:14.9 from last year. Sam Dyke of Boys High and Ted Slowick of Monroe. Experts are buzzing that Sassport could dip under that mark if the pace is hot. Over in the 1,000 yards, another relatively obscure relay specialist, Tom Farrell of Archbishop Malloy, is the man to beat after running 2:15.5 in his debut individual effort, believed to be the fastest schoolboy time ever recorded. That's more than 2 seconds better than the existing Hayes meet record, and a full 6 seconds ahead of Pete Tullis of Aviation Trades, who won the Laughlin Games but is seated behind Farrell today. Tullis will be gunning to close that gap, but Farrell looks poised to rewrite the books. Other events promise fireworks too. Dudley Long of Wilson Vocational is favored in the 100-yard dash after tying the meet record of 10.1 seconds in the Laughlin Games. He'll be chasing Mel Barnwell's 1956 standard outright. Roy Wooden of Union High in New Jersey is a threat in the 60-yard high hurdles, and Wingate's strong 880-yard relay squad could turn heads. In team standings heading into the day, Bishop Laughlin holds a slim 5-point lead, thanks to Pete Hafner's shot put victory at 54 feet 3/4 inches. But with keen competition across the board, anything can happen in this second major indoor meet of the young season. Meanwhile, looking ahead, the prestigious Millrose Games are just weeks away at Madison Square Garden, where the nation's elite will gather for what promises to be another record-setting night. On the college front, NYU took a commanding lead in the Metropolitan AAU Indoor Track Championships, scoring 36 points with wins in 3 events, ahead of the Pioneers and the New York Athletic Club. That's your track update. Fast times and young stars making their mark on the indoor circuit. And now, to wrap up our lighter side on this historic but chilly Saturday, here's a collection of those quirky little tales that prove even on a day of grand ceremonies and solemn oaths, human folly and fun find a way to sneak in. First, a high-level hat dilemma that kept fashion watchers, and probably a few Secret Servicemen, on their toes throughout yesterday's inauguration. Our new President Kennedy, as many know, has never been much for hats. He prefers that vigorous, bare-headed look. But protocol demanded a silk topper for the occasion, so what did he do? He kept it firmly on his lap during the indoor ceremonies at the Capitol. Then, during the open-car drive down Pennsylvania Avenue, it was on again, off again, like a comic routine. At 10th Street, on it went. By 11th, off it came. At 12th, back on top. Meanwhile, former President Eisenhower, who usually favors a snug black Homburg, also spent much of the day holding his top hat, rather than wearing it. One can't help but wonder if the biting wind had something to do with it, or if the two leaders were quietly agreeing that hats are more trouble than they're worth at such moments. Next, a nautical adventure that went nowhere fast, right in the heart of Manhattan. At the National Motorboat Show in the Coliseum,
Englishman Patrick Elam decided to liven things up by demonstrating his clever little invention, a 5-foot ice boat called the Icebird, designed to skim across frozen lakes at up to 50 miles an hour with just one sailor aboard. So Mr. Elam and his assistant, Steve Lang, hoisted the craft out onto 58th Street near Columbus Circle, right under the watchful eye of Christopher Columbus's statue, and tried to launch it on the slushy pavement. Last, those sharp, narrow runners meant for solid ice sank straight into the city-plowed slush and refused to budge an inch. The Icebird was stopped cold, literally, before it could even catch a breeze. Back inside it went, leaving onlookers chuckling and suggesting perhaps Mr. Elam invent a slush boat next time for New York winters. And from halfway around the world, a canine celebrity update that's wagging tails in Moscow today. Remember those brave Soviet space dogs that pioneered orbital flight? Well, one of the pioneering pooches from earlier missions has become a proud mother, and her puppies are the talk of the town in the Russian capital, stealing a bit of the spotlight from our own earthly events here. Finally, a brief tale from the Inaugural itself. During the traditional burning of ballots in the little stove to signal the Cardinal's conclave, wait, no, that was a false alarm at the Capitol when wisps of smoke curled up unexpectedly, sending guards scurrying before they realized it was nothing more ominous than a bit of over-enthusiastic heating on a snowy day. There you have it, folks. Hats that couldn't make up their minds, an iceboat beached on city slush, space puppies making news, and a touch of smoke that stirred no real fire. Proof that even on the most momentous days, life serves up its share of smiles. We'll close the broadcast shortly with some final thoughts on this turning point in our nation's story. Stay with us on the Harlan Evening Report. What a day it has been. A day when history turned a fresh page under a blanket of snow and a sky full of promise. Yesterday, a young man from Massachusetts, barely out of his 40s, stood hatless in the sharp winter wind and took the oath that made him the 35th president of these United States. His words still ring in our ears. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Simple, direct, and bold, like the man himself. In that single sentence, John Fitzgerald Kennedy summoned a generation to service, to sacrifice, and to a new frontier of achievement. And across the nation, from crowded cities to quiet farms, millions felt the stir of something rare, a sense that we are being called to greatness once more. We watched the parade march by in overcoats and scarves. We danced at 5 glittering balls until dawn, and we shivered through it all, yet no one complained. For in that cold, we felt the warmth of renewal. An old soldier bid us farewell with a grave warning about powers that could endanger our liberties if left unchecked. A new leader answered with a challenge to conquer the unsolved mysteries of space, science, and peace itself. Beyond our borders, voices reached out. Khrushchev speaking of negotiation, Castro hinting at amity. While here at home, storms kept us indoors, jets puzzled investigators, and labor clouds gathered over the railroads. Yet even in the small stories, the iceboat stuck on 58th Street, the top hats that couldn't decide whether to stay on or off, we were reminded that life, for all its grandeur, keeps its sense of humor. My friends, I have broadcast news through war and peace, boom and bust, and I tell you tonight, there is electricity in the air. The torch has indeed been passed. Whether it lights a brighter path or casts longer shadows will depend on all of us, on the vigor we bring, the wisdom we show, and the courage we summon when the hour demands it. So as the lights dim in Washington and the snow settles quietly across the land, Let us take President Kennedy's words to heart. Let us meet the challenges ahead not with fear, but with faith in our country, in one another, and in the enduring promise of America. This is Edward R. Harlan saying good night. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. We'll be back tomorrow with more news of this unfolding new era. Until then, keep asking what you can do.